And it's a big box of stuff. It's got a lot of stuff in it. We don't know exactly what's in there, but there's something in it. And the only real reference point I'm making here is that we upset whatever it was that was in that box.
Right, and one of the indications of that was, because we didn't just come to this conclusion out of nowhere, was when we went and interviewed Lucas Scantamburlo about Planet X, and our car was broken into at the Milan airport. And then we flew to Norway right after that, and that was when our car was, so it was in between those two interviews to interview. We interviewed Leo Zagami in Norway.
Yeah, all of that kind of stuff.
And so that was one incident. We also had the flat tire at the top of
but we're going into too much detail here.
I know, but they need, you know, they also need the nuts and bolts of where how this threat manifested.
Right. Okay. So there's some connection between Leo Zagami and the Illuminati, and at that point, I think we became a red flag on someone's radar. Okay. Then soon after that, 6 months after that, we had the whole Jake Simpson stuff. Jake Simpson is a whistleblower who worked deeply in the, what can we say, the intelligence, military intelligence of several major Western world countries. He's psychically trained. He knows a lot of stuff. We have a report on the Camelot website about it. And what he would do, and this is a very important story to tell here. Let me see if I can do this in just a minute flat. When he told us stuff, he would be very guarded, and he'd be talking in code words, and he'd be sort of just kind of, he'd be talking really enigmatically, almost like he was looking around him psychically if anyone was listening. Now, there wasn't anyone around. He'd do this even if he was on his own. And then 10 minutes later, he'd say something much more clearly. And after a couple of days of this, I said to him, "You're timing what you say to us, aren't you?" And he said, "Yes." He said, "I'm avoiding the sweeps." And I said, "Well, what are the sweeps you're talking about? Is this electromagnetic surveillance?" He said, "No." He said, "It's something that makes electromagnetic surveillance look like it's in the Stone Age." And to cut this long story short, he told us that there was a surveillance system that operated in hyperspace that's been in existence for more than 20 years, in which any conversation anywhere can be plucked out of the reality matrix and downloaded to a database. They don't need microphones. It's not even done electronically. It's a hyperspace thing. It's been back engineered.
But it's in AI.
It's AI.
Get to the bottom line.
It's more than echelon?
Yes. No, there's much more than that. It's got nothing to do with code words. It's got to do, what he told us. I'll tell you what he told us. This is my paraphrase of what he told us. Somebody right now, probably in Pine Gap or one of these places, could decide that they wanted to figure out what Mel had said to Bill and Kerry yesterday. And then they dial it up, and they pull it out, and they find it. It's directly connected into the Akashic records, if you like. It's not limited to time. Now, they can't get everything because they can't analyze the data. So they still have to be specific, and it's not 100% perfect. But when I was talking with Jake, at the very, very end, I had an interesting experience. We were there with him for
experience. Excuse me, because I was there too.
But the experience I had was after you went to bed.
I know, but it was happening before that. So
I understand
that's what
that.
You don't.
Yeah, I understand that. I'm just reporting the experience that I had.
Okay.
It was very late at night. We were having a barbecue out on the terrace in the sunshine. Late at night, we're having a barbecue out on the terrace in the heat of this tropical environment. It was very, very pleasant. Kerry had already gone to bed. It was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and Jake said, "I've got some stuff that I really want to tell you because you're leaving tomorrow, and I'm going to take a risk and tell you this stuff." And he was in a rented villa. There was no electronics around. Nobody could have predicted we were going to have this conversation. He started to talk about it, and he had to work really hard to make his mouth move. He described it as fighting your way like a cartoon character trying to fight their way through a bubblegum bubble. And on the other side of this, I was falling asleep. Suddenly, I was going really dopey, like I'd just been injected with something. And I was fighting to stay awake. He was fighting to talk. He forced himself to tell me whatever it was that he told me. We kept on going till about 4 o'clock in the morning. I went off to bed. I saw him for breakfast the next day, and I said to him, "You know what? That weird thing that happened last night, I can't remember what it was that you were trying to tell me." And he said, "You know what? It's just as well." And so I don't even know what it was that he was trying to tell me. It wasn't a chemical mind wipe, but there was a remote influence going on that was shutting the whole conversation down because it knew that it was happening and it's triggered to respond in that particular way. And since then I've talked with other people who've had that same experience. And then of course we wrote the whole thing up as a report. Now that upset somebody. That information's never been out there. There are a lot of people watching this now, listening to this now, who've never heard this information before. They've had this technology for 20 years.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people don't read, actually, you know, because we make videos, a lot of people miss some of the written reports, which are just as important in some ways as the video.
Google Project Camelot, Jake Simpson.
Yes,
and you'll get it.
But I just want to interject here that actually when we were talking to Jake, this was happening the whole time. And that we tapped into it, we discussed it actually before I went to bed. And that I was feeling the same effects of it, which is why I went to bed. So, you know, just to put in context.
You also suffer the same symptoms.
Yeah, absolutely. It was being targeted at us. And I decided to stop fighting it and just get away from there, is what happened. And you stayed. I figured maybe he would, because he was really struggling before I left. I don't know if you remember that, but these are sort of smaller details. But the gist of the thing, to move on, and because we don't have all day, is to go to, yes, we upset them at that point, and obviously that was a trigger issue. Then there are other groups that we've.
This is the second item in a 7-item list. The next one is Pete Peterson. Dr. Pete Peterson. And if anyone watches our interview with Pete Peterson, once again, Google Project Camelot and Pete Peterson, you will see at the very, very end of the second part a wonderful, very amusing little cameo in which Pete was really aggravated by a little comment that Kerry said based on her intuitive pickup of something that he had not said. In the final part, which was Kerry's turn in the ring, because we were doing tag team with this whole thing, to talk, then Kerry really pushed the envelope, as she does, very, very well. And we later learned, much later, a year later, we learned that we upset the Pentagon so much that somebody wanted to take Kerry out. They wanted to kill her. They wanted to kill her because of that.
Well, they were planning to. So that was the word we got. So at that point, we also...
What is it that was, if you don't mind my asking, I remember a certain point of the interview where you said, if I tell you, they'll kill me and they'll kill you. What was it that was said that was so upsetting?
Okay, Bill, I really, let me talk about this if you don't mind. I just want to say that we have to be careful here, okay? So rather than answer you too directly, what I want to do is urge people to re-listen to that interview, and it's well worth it. There's tremendous amount of value. He's one of the best witnesses we ever had. Now, after he did the interview, it took us a month to get clearance to release the interview.
Which we
he
never,
did not want to really release it.
We didn't get clearance.
Well, we finally did from him, and then he took it back a few hours later. And then he regretted it, and so he's not in contact with us as a consequence of that sort of back and forth right now. However, he was brought back into the Pentagon. There's evidence that he had some health problems as a result of the interview and so on. So it's not just one way. This is another thing.
And his wife died.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
And I just want to say that some of the things that we've experienced go beyond us. Okay. That the trouble that we had, that was a result of some of the people that we upset on high levels in terms of running the world, so to speak, and be they ET or non-ET. Goes into the witnesses that revealed some of the information as well. They have been taken out of the game, so to speak, in certain ways. They're not coming forward. They're not as much, and so on, since having done the interviews. Right.
After Pete Peterson, the next one was Dan Birish. Dan Birish came to a conference that some people had organized in Zurich in Switzerland. And there was a question and answer session, an open panel. David Wilcock was there as well. And he was asked a question about vaccinations, because this was in the middle of this whole swine flu thing, which a lot of people got very exercised about. And that created almost a minor riot, because Dan was standing up and saying, and I wasn't expecting this to happen, this wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't prepared, we never knew the questioner was going to come. He said there's nothing wrong with vaccinations, and basically he was defending the party line. Kerry, who wasn't at that conference, got very alarmed and made a statement, because my position was unclear, because I was being a moderator on this, and I seemed to be allowing it to roll. And people were saying to me, well, you know, are you supporting Dan? Why did you let him talk for so long? And it's just my style, I just let people talk. So Kerry posted a statement, a very clear statement on the Camelot website, saying that we do not support the public vaccination program. In fact, we don't even believe that vaccinations work. And then, after you had done that, I immediately posted my own post saying that I'm completely stand with you on that. I fully agree. This is my personal position. Very shortly after, Dan Burish and Marcy McDowell, now I think called Dan Crane and Marcy Crane, they distanced themselves from us publicly and attacked us viciously, using a lot of stuff that was very untrue. Dan was a personal friend. We love the man. He makes his decisions based on the information that's provided to him, and he's heavily controlled. We lost Dan as a friend, and to this day, I have no idea what his personal position is on this. But
okay,
but we upset it. But just the way that taps into this list of antagonists that we generated was, it's quite possible that there's an MJ12 connection in there because we upset them.
Yes, but I actually have to bring my piece to this, because what happened also was that there was some behind-the-scenes machinations going on during that conference, which indicated that there was some premeditation on their part in terms of them beginning to pull away from us, even before this sort of incident that happened with Dan. And there was a simultaneous experience or occurrence and that happened. And I was not invited, I was not allowed to come to that conference, even though I wanted to. But Henry Deacon was there. And he was also there. He went on stage and he backed Brian O'Leary in terms of free energy on stage, and he came forward there.
I want to say who Henry is.
Henry Deacon is one of our witnesses. He's a person who has worked in block projects, who was very unusual in that he didn't specialize in and get into this silo sort of notion. He was more like, and this is a loose sense of the use of the word, but a project manager. And he worked for various 3-letter agency, 4-letter agencies. And so he had a wider view of the big picture than most witnesses or people that work in black projects usually ever get. So he is one of our best witnesses to ever come forward. But at any rate, what he did on stage with Brian O'Leary, the ex-astronaut, who is also a Camelot witness, was to support him and to stand by him. This happened simultaneously, whereas at the same time, Dan and Marcy were also doing something behind the scenes with regard to Bill in a hotel room where he was surreptitiously, supposedly filmed, saying negative things about me. And what happened was that it appears that was a premeditated event that Majestic must have set them up to do.
And so that's correct. There was some kind of a sting involved there as well.
Right.
There was.
So then what happened right after that conference was that everyone was so surprised that Henry Deacon came on stage and revealed who he was, that the organizers of the Barcelona conference that happened a couple weeks later invited Henry Deacon and paid his way to go down to that conference. And they actually didn't want him to speak, they just wanted to allow him to be there. I'm not sure what was going on there with their sort of motivation or whatever, but obviously they were interested to meet him personally, I imagine. And what happened there, and this is where we angered another group,
yep,
or the same group even
exactly
more, you might say, was that Henry Deacon, at the end of Bob Dean's talk about Mars, a very wonderful talk that's on the internet, in which Bob Dean did a wonderful presentation on Mars, Henry Deacon went on stage and revealed that he had been to Mars. I had suggested to him that this was an opportunity to do so, since we were frustrated that he didn't have an opportunity to actually speak himself. And then he actually told me no, first of all, and then I left and went across the auditorium to where I was sitting on the other side. And then I saw him actually go up to the front of the stage, and having changed his mind, I accompanied him on stage simply to give him sort of moral support. This is the first time he ever went public in terms of revealing who he was and the fact that he'd been on Mars. And he was extremely nervous. He's been widely criticized because he didn't go into any depth at that point. But we were actually told to get off the stage. It was something of a contentious event. Bob Dean was more than happy to have us there at the end of his presentation. We have a long history with Bob Dean. But we don't know exactly what went on there, except that I do know that Stephen Greer seemed to be instrumental in some way at the back of the stage after we left the stage in Barcelona, and there were some incidents with regard to free energy activists, and they had some misunderstandings, thinking that Greer had threatened them when in fact he didn't. And we were instrumental in clearing that misunderstanding up.
The upshot is that there was no question that Henry was threatened about a week after that. He arrived at Amsterdam, where he'd also been invited to do a conference. Everyone flocked to that place thinking he was going to say more about his Mars experience, and he talked about vitamin D3.
Right.